Okay, welcome to week 14 office hours. Right now, we are working towards completing the informal fallacies quiz, getting ready for the proofs quiz, and completing our final module on causation. In this video, I'm going to go through the informal fallacies practice quiz. Let's see if it gets down here. There we go. Okay, I'm going to go through the multiple choice ones briefly to focus on the actual fallacy questions in more depth. So what's the best definition of a fallacy? It's an error in reasoning that renders an argument invalid or weak. It's hard to give a definition of a fallacy because technically one of our fallacies renders the argument uncogent because it has a false premise. That would be the slippery slope fallacy. The slippery slope fallacy has a false premise. It could be, if the premises are true, it would be a strong argument or perhaps even a deductive argument. And the problem is a false premise. So technically this definition doesn't even capture it. But the important point is it's a common error in reasoning that makes an argument bad. It's not an inductive argument with a false conclusion because you could have a really good, strong argument that happens to have a false conclusion. That's one of the things that separates an inductive argument from a deductive argument. And an invalid deductive argument is essentially always is the definition of a bad deductive argument. But that doesn't mean it's a bad argument overall. It doesn't mean it's a fallacy. But we won't go into that anymore. Okay, what is true of inductive arguments? So a cogent argument may have a false premise. What is a cogent argument? A cogent argument is an argument that is both strong and has all true premises. Can an argument that's strong with all true premises have a false premise? No. An argument that commits a fallacy may have a true conclusion. Is that true? An argument that commits a fallacy may have a true conclusion. You can have a crappy argument with a true conclusion. So that seems right. If the conclusion is false, it must be committing a fallacy. That kind of goes with this one up here, an inductive argument with a false conclusion. Is not the definition of a fallacy. We said here that you can have a great inductive argument that happens to have a false conclusion. Again, if you have an argument that happens to have a false conclusion, it doesn't mean it's committing a fallacy. It's just a thing that's possible for all inductive arguments. It's what makes them inductive, that the conclusion could be false. And we can have some good inductive arguments. So this one is going to be 2 here. An argument commits a fallacy, may have a true conclusion, like you could get lucky. Okay, which of the following are true? Any argument that criticizes a person commits an ad hominem fallacy. No, that's important. An ad hominem fallacy does involve criticizing a person, or often involves not even always, but often involves criticizing a person. But it's not the mere criticizing of a person that's at issue. It's that you are doing that instead of examining and evaluating their argument. So if you criticize a person and then argue that what they said is wrong, or that their argument is bad, or that we should reject their argument, that would be an ad hominem fallacy. Just criticizing a person isn't enough. And sometimes criticizing a person could be logically relevant to the conclusion if the conclusion is about the person. An ad hominem fallacy involves 2 arguers. Yes, it does. Because in an ad hominem fallacy, you are criticizing another person in place of their argument. So there has to be an original person who gave an argument, and then you attack that person instead of their argument. So there are two arguers. There is another fallacy, at least of the ones we are studying. There's another fallacy that involves two arguers. Can you think of what that one is? The straw person fallacy, where one person is criticizing, or at least takes themselves to be criticizing, another person's argument, but in fact they aren't. They're mischaracterizing that argument. So it does involve two arguers. An ad hominem fallacy occurs when logically irrelevant facts about a person are provided as a reason to reject that person's argument. That's a beautiful definition. The existence of an ulterior motive, so that's the kind of thing that isn't necessarily criticizing, could just be a fact. The existence of an ulterior motive is almost always logically irrelevant to the quality of a person's argument. True. Emphasis on the word logically. The only thing that can be wrong with an argument is the premises fail to support the conclusion, or the premises are true. That the person has an ulterior motive is not logically relevant to the quality of their argument. Now, it might be practically, having an ulterior motive might often be a reason to be suspicious of someone's argument, such that we should scrutinize it, or that we don't have time to listen to it, but it is not itself a problem with the argument. And also, there's a sense in which we always have some kind of interior motive when we argue, right? And so the point is, we need to examine arguments, not people's motives, when we actually care about getting it right. All right, identify the conclusion of the following argument. I have to partner up with someone, and my only options are Adrian and Steve. Although Steve is a nice enough guy, he's about as sharp as a marble. So the first thing I'm noticing is this is a discounting word, although, so we're discounting Steve is a nice enough guy. That's not even really part of the argument. That's just a thing we've discounted. So I would say that here's a claim. I have to partner with someone and my only options are Adrian and Steve. Here's another claim. Steve is about as sharp as a marble. So is this an argument or what? So whenever you encounter a passage, go through the whole process. Start with, is it an argument? If so, what's the conclusion? Nothing we've got here is a conclusion. So we have two options. Either this is not an argument, this is somebody just stating some facts, or two, the conclusion is implicit. Let's examine this second option. If the conclusion is implicit, what would it be? I had two options, Adrian and Steve, for partnering up on something. Steve is as sharp as a marble. That's a bad thing, right? So I'm going to partner up with Adrian. I see that that's one of the options. That makes sense. It's an implicit conclusion. And since one of the things we've been focusing on is arguments with implicit conclusions, it's a good guess. Okay, so I'm going to go with this over this isn't an argument. Now, question, would this one be an ad hominem fallacy? No. Someone got criticized. Steve did. Poor Steve. But we didn't criticize Steve instead of his argument. We said something kind of mean about Steve, but whether or not you're particularly sharp might be a relevant criterion people use when they decide if they want to partner up with you on something. Sad but true. So maybe this is a relevant part of the argument that draws a conclusion about who you will partner up with. So no ad hominem fallacy here. Okay, let's go through the fill in the blanks. Man is the only rational animal. Since no woman is a man, no woman is rational. What do you think this one is? Okay, so let's go through our whole step. If it's an argument, and hint, they will all be arguments. If it's an argument, it should have a conclusion. What is the conclusion? Look for argument markers. Since is a reason marker. So my reason is no woman is a man. So the conclusion is either man is the only rational animal or no woman is rational. Which one is the conclusion? It's this one. Okay, so premise, man is the only rational animal. No woman is a man. Therefore, no woman is rational. What could have gone wrong here? It does seem like there's a trick. Do you see any patterns? Whenever something seems tricky, one option is equivocation. So this one doesn't have as clear of a pattern as the other ones because what stands out isn't a pattern, it's the misuse of a word, and that could look like all kinds of things. But if you're not sure what the pattern is or it seems like something's tricky, try equivocation. Is there a word that has two meanings and does that affect the argument? In this case, here man means human, and here man means male member of the species, and ignore the assumptions about the binariness of just for the sake of argument. It's clear, whatever else might be going on here, that man is being used in two ways when we conclude that no woman is rational. So since it really is being used in two ways, this is a fallacy. Steve is always arguing that everyone should quit smoking since, I've noticed a conclusion marker or a reason marker, it's so bad for your health. So we've got Steve has made an argument, and his conclusion is smoking is bad for your health, so everyone should quit smoking. Okay, I think it's funny that he's the one making this argument since, okay, now I'm making an argument, and my reason is he himself is a smoker. So yeah, I think we can conclude, well, there's more argument language. I think we can conclude that Steve is a bit of a hypocrite. So if I'm going to put this into standard form, my conclusion is that Steve is a bit of a hypocrite. And why do I think that? Well, he is always arguing about how bad smoking is for your health and gives that as a reason for quitting. And he himself is a smoker, therefore he's a bit of a hypocrite. I also see that there's two arguers here, me, or whoever I am in this passage, and Steve, whose argument I'm talking about. So what does it look like? Well, we've got two arguers, and we've got us calling the arguer a name or pointing something out about the arguer. The arguer is a hypocrite. So it looks like ad hominem. Our last question is it? One of the varieties of ad hominem is to point out that someone's a hypocrite and use that as a reason to reject their argument. That's called an ad hominem tu quoque. But this isn't one. Why? Because we aren't rejecting Steve's argument on the basis of calling him a hypocrite. We are giving reasons for thinking he's a hypocrite. He says one thing and does another. Implicit premise, that's the definition of a hypocrite. So this one's not a fallacy. It has the same pattern, but in fact, the reasoning is actually relevant to the conclusion. The conclusion is about Steve, and the reasons I'm giving support him being a hypocrite. The conclusion is about Steve. In the model of an ad hominem argument, the conclusion is about Steve's argument, and the reason is him being a hypocrite. Here, the conclusion is a hypocrite, and we've got reasons for thinking he's a hypocrite. Okay, let's move on. Mario says to Julia, you should try to make more time for exercise. Study after study shows the benefits of regular exercise. And Julia says, how can you suggest that I'm lazy? You know what my schedule is like. I don't have time to spend 6 hours at the gym every morning. Hint, in this passage, Julia is Tanya. So when somebody tells this person they need to make more time of exercise, and Julia responds this way, what fallacy does this look like? Well, we have two arguers. We've got Mario has made a case. What is Mario's argument? There are no argument indicator words, but an argument is being given. What's the conclusion? You should try to make more time for exercise. What's the reason? It's got real benefits. Notice we've got study after study shows. Were we given any studies? No, they exist, but we aren't given them. So this is just assuring language. When we reconstruct this argument in standard form, if you were going to, you wouldn't include this, just exercise, regular exercise has benefits. And if you want support for that, actually go, find the studies. But for now, we'll just take that. That's the reason. And then you should make more time for exercise. It's the conclusion. Now, Julia is responding to Mario's argument. She says, how can you suggest that I'm lazy? That's a rhetorical question. Presumably she means you have no basis for calling me lazy. You know what my schedule is like. I don't have time to spend 6 hours at the gym every morning. So it looks like she's saying, I have a busy schedule. I don't have time to spend 6 hours at the gym every morning. Therefore, I'm not lazy. And you're wrong. Julia has not actually responded to the argument in any way, but instead has presented a straw person argument, which is much easier to defend. Julia's probably not lazy. She just needs to exercise some more. So is this a fallacy? Yes. Okay. Next one. Joan. I doubt what you saw was a California condor. There are only 200 in the whole state. Maybe it was a turkey vulture or a golden eagle? Matt says, no way. I totally saw a condor. It was a huge soaring bird with white under its wings. California condors are huge and have white under their wings. All right, what does this look like? You might be thinking, well, I see two arguers, so it's either ad hominem or straw person. And it's not one of those two. What else are you noticing? Whose argument are we examining? We're examining Matt's. And what is his conclusion? I saw, very confident, I saw a California condor. What are his reasons? I saw a huge soaring bird with white under its wings. Premise one. California condors are huge and have white under their wings. Therefore, I totally saw a California condor. Now, Joan is clearly talking about Matt's argument. It hasn't supplied, Matt's not responding to Joan's argument really, I guess, but let's just focus on Matt's reasoning in and of itself. Joan here is supplying some background information, like California condors are pretty rare, and maybe you saw something else. And Matt is confident, so he thinks that he very likely, I totally saw a California condor. There's probabilistic reasoning going on here. Given my observations and given what a California condor looks like, what is the probability that Matt saw a California condor? He thinks it's extremely high, so high that he's just confident. He's sure. This is reasoning that involves ignoring a base rate. So indeed, California condors do have these features, and assume he did see that. But what are the odds, given what he saw was this, that what he saw was a California condor? Now, you don't need this background knowledge, but if you looked it up, you'd find that turkey vultures and golden eagles also have similar markings to California condors. So it's conceivable you could mix up the two. And these two birds are really common, whereas the California condor is really rare. So it looks like it could be a base rate fallacy. I made up this question, and I had to like Google birds that look like one another. And I'm imagining, you know, when I make up this example, that Matt just randomly saw this bird soaring, like either sitting out in his backyard. You know, we live in California, so maybe saw some big soaring bird, or on the side of a highway while driving or something. However, if we get another piece of information that Matt and Joan are like at a California condor reserve or a place that's known for them or something, like that would change the information we have, including the base rate probability that any bird you're seeing is a California condor or whatever. But as is, he's ignoring information, which is that there's more than one thing consistent with his data. What he saw, a huge songbird with white under its wings, and the odds of seeing a California condor in general are extremely low, whereas seeing any other bird, even birds with it, is extremely high. So if we took that into consideration, he should not be nearly so confident that what he saw was a California condor. Question 9. Okay, the NOAA Climate Prediction Center's weather models are predicting a monster storm that could wreak havoc all along the eastern seaboard. The National Weather Service has predicted that the storm will make landfall in southern New Jersey, mere miles from your home. Everyone in your evacuation zone has been advised to evacuate. You should too. Okay, start at the beginning. Is this an argument? And if so, what is the conclusion? Well, it ends with, you should do something. So we've got just information, models, storm, havoc, eastern seaboard, landfall coming soon, mere miles from your home. So just background information about the storm is coming. Everyone in your evacuation zone advised to evacuate, presumably by somebody in official. You should too. Pretty clearly, the conclusion is you should evacuate. Storm is coming and everyone has been advised to evacuate. You should evacuate. Now, does this look like it has the pattern of any of our fallacies? Well, this you should too, everyone is doing it, you should too. Hopefully that at least looks like an ad populum fallacy immediately to you. So it's a good thing to do. Everyone else is doing it, therefore it's a good thing to do. However, we also have to ask, is it actually a fallacy? It certainly looks like an ad populum fallacy, but is it actually a fallacy? When is an ad populum argument, or when it looks like it, not a fallacy? One is when the conclusion is logically irrelevant, when it is logically relevant to the conclusion. So what people are doing is logically relevant to the conclusion. So a common example is about rudeness. I've thrown a few of those kinds of things in. So if the conclusion is that that something is rude, and the claim is that everyone thinks it's rude, so like you shouldn't talk during a movie because everyone thinks it's rude. You might say, well, the fact that everyone thinks something rude just is what makes a thing rude. Like that's logically relevant. What people think is relevant to what's rude. So if you're drawing a conclusion about rudeness, what people think is totally relevant. This isn't such a case. Whether or not you should evacuate, it's not logically relevant like that lots of people are evaluating. What's logically relevant is the reasons you have to evacuate, right? However, one, we've got everyone in your evacuation zone has been advised to evacuate. So maybe if you're advised by somebody knowledgeable to do something, then it's a good idea to do it. So there's more than just people are doing it. And recall that we also said that, of course, popularity isn't logically relevant most of the time. Like when you're buying chips, say, the fact that chips are popular are not one of the criteria we look for in chips. When I eat my chips, I'm like, I can tell everyone else likes these chips. What we do is we use them as an indication of goodness. And in order for it to be a good indicator, we should trust that these chips are popular for the right reason. And similarly, we should, if this is a good argument, we should trust that everyone is doing this for a good reason. And we've been given that reason. They've been advised, presumably by somebody official who knows what they're doing. Without an advisory, we might worry that like people evacuate too easily, and this is sort of like a following, being a lemming kind of situation where everyone starts evacuating and it snowballs and then the roads are packed and people die on the roads or something like that. But that's not what's suggested by this case here, that everyone's been advised to evacuate. Okay, beating a dead horse here a little bit. So this one is not an ad populum fallacy. Question 10. This logic class is going to be easy. On the first day of class, we spent a ton of time on an icebreaker activity, and then we spent an hour talking about what a statement is. It was so easy. Okay, is it an argument, and what is the conclusion? The conclusion is this logic class is going to be so easy. How do we know that? There's no argument indicator words anywhere, no conclusion markers, no reason markers. So since we don't have any of that, we have to decide, do any of these statements support any of the other statements? And all of these statements do support this one. Why think the logic class is going to be easy? Well, reason, on the first day of class, we did this, and then we did that, and those things were super easy. Therefore, the logic class is going to be easy. Okay, so we found the conclusion. What else are we noticing? We're drawing a conclusion about a whole class on the basis of the first day of class. So that's like a sample, right? If the class has lots of days, if you pick one random day to look at and then draw a conclusion about the whole class on the basis of that one day, you're drawing a conclusion on the basis of a sample. So this looks like a generalization. So this might fit the pattern of a hasty generalization. Is it? Well, let's ask ourselves, is the sample, the first day of class, representative of a whole class? Of course not. On the first day of class, nobody's been expected to do any reading. You haven't gotten to know each other yet. You do icebreaker activities sometimes. So this is definitely a fallacy. Let's do a passage analysis question. Okay, we've got this passage. Yeah, but if I'm considerate toward one person about one thing, what's next? Be nice to other people about other things? Where does it end? Okay, think about this one for a moment. Step 1, does it contain an argument? And if so, what is the conclusion? And keep in mind that conclusions may be explicitly stated or implicit. And hint, every passage you get is totally going to be an argument. Okay, what is the conclusion? So we've got an, if I'm considerate toward one person about one thing, what's next? Well, what's next is be nice to other people about other things. Where does it end? So I'm going to write down what we've got so far. Now, it helps to reword things to clarify. So claim, if I'm considerate towards one person about one thing, this is sort of rhetorical and then it's answered, then I will have to be nice to other people about other things. Rhetorical question, where does it end? And it doesn't end, which means I will have to be nice to everyone about everything or something like that. That's what's suggested by where does it end? It doesn't. It doesn't end. What does that mean? I'll have to be nice to everyone about everything. So far, we've just captured what's been said. So if I'm considerate toward one person about one thing, then I'll have to be nice. Remember what we clarify words, if I'm considerate toward, be nice to, those things mean the same things. And since nice is the shorter word, I'm going to cut this one and say, if I'm nice to one person about one thing, then I will have to be nice to other people about other things. And it doesn't end, which equals something like, and if I'm nice to other people about other things, then I will have to be nice to everyone about everything. Okay, we still haven't answered the question though. What's the conclusion here? So we've clarified what's been said or suggested so far. Is there a conclusion, or, and if it's not clear, maybe you rephrase it as, what's the so what? In this case, it's, so don't be nice to one person about one thing. And imagine the context in which this is, it seems like the person who says this is responding to someone else. Like someone says, hey, be nice to Jimmy. And they say, yeah, but if I'm considerate towards one person about one thing, what's next? Be nice to other people about other things? Where does it end? So I shouldn't be nice to Jimmy because it starts this whole chain of events. So the conclusion appears to be, I shouldn't be nice to this person in question about the thing in question, one person about one thing. And that is implicit. So I would now rephrase this. I'm not going to do it in the video. I'd rephrase this to answer, like, this passage contains an argument. The conclusion is that I shouldn't be nice to one person about one thing, and that's implicit. Oftentimes when the conclusion is implicit, there's more than one option, in which case you might explore both options, but this case seems to be pretty clear what the conclusion is. We could put it in standard form, but that would just, what the heck, let's do it. Put it in standard form. Since we've already started clarifying the passage, it's not too hard. We've got most of the stuff in here. So one, if I'm nice to one person about one thing, and if I'm nice to other people about other things, oops. Draw a little bar here. Okay, now is anything missing? So this is definitely, like, it captures what we've been given. It's filled stuff in. It's looking good. I filled in the implicit conclusion here. That's good. Is anything missing? Well, as you go through this A through D here, you might go back and forth between the two. You might not answer that, because notice how figuring out what the conclusion was helped us to start by clarifying the argument, and that led us to be able to put it in standard form. And at this point, this seems like a pretty good reconstruction of the argument, but we might start identifying what's implicit. And one thing that can help us to identify what's implicit is look for common argument patterns. So let's move on to C, determine whether we've had this argument we've got so far has any of the characteristic features of an informal fallacy. And I see that there's, like, if I do one thing, then I have to do another thing, and it kind of snowballs. So it looks like this argument is citing a slippery slope. And things like what's next or where does it end are often indicators of slippery slopes, or before you know it. Okay, so what is the pattern of a slippery slope? The pattern of a slippery slope is, one, if you take first step, then slippery slope. One thing leads to another. This could happen across a variety of premises or whatever, but if A and B, and B and C, C and D, whatever. Slippery slope ends with X. 2, X is bad. 3, conclusion. Don't take the first step. So if we start to think this looks like a slippery slope, we can go back to the argument we've started reconstructing and see if it fits this format. If we've got a slippery slope, we've got the claim that the end result is bad and that we shouldn't take the first step. So we have spelled out the slippery slope. It starts with being nice to one person about one thing. Then you've got to be nice to other people about other things. And then if you do that, then you should be nice to everyone about everything. Therefore, don't take the first step. I already sort of, recognize that. But if you hadn't gotten the conclusion yet, but you think it's a slippery slope, that's a hint to you that the conclusion is don't take the first step. And the first step was being nice to one person about one thing. So I shouldn't be nice to one person about one thing. There's another thing. X is bad. So implicit premise here. Being nice to everyone about everything is bad or impossible or something like that. Okay, so now that I've reconstructed it, it's pretty clear for part C, I would say. This looks like a slippery slope argument. Clearly got a slippery slope, and the conclusion is don't take that first step. Then D, we would ask, is it a fallacy? Some slippery slopes are real. Sometimes taking the first step leads to disastrous consequences, and that's a very good reason to not take that first step. Is this such a case? Okay, this is taken from okay, type all my words here. Okay, I was gonna pull up a comic strip, but my internet appears to be slow for some reason. Well, at any rate, you'll see when you submit your practice quiz, because I believe that I included the comic strip there, but this is from a joke, right? So you could probably go either way in your analysis of whether or not this is a fallacy. You could think like being nice to everyone about everything really is impossible. So something like that. Or you might say like there's two places where this argument goes wrong. First of all, there's nothing wrong with being nice to everyone about everything. Like it's not saying you have to do favors for everyone or just like be nice. Be considerate. That is just a thing humans should do for everyone, blanket statement or something. There's nothing wrong with that. So false, underlying assumption. Or two, this isn't a real slippery slope. We can draw a line. Like being nice to, of course, there's no like causal thing. Like if you're nice to one person, suddenly like magic will happen. Be like nice all the time. Maybe if you do it enough, you'll build the habit or something. But it's more like if you're nice to one person about one thing, then you should be nice to other people. And if you're nice to, then you'll have like if you're consistent or something. Point is, it's possible like you could argue that this isn't really a slippery slope. We can draw a line. We can be nice to some people and not others. And in fact, that's how most of us are. Or it's not the case that we should be nice to everyone just because we're nice to one person, like the principle of it. Or you might think you really should be nice to everyone. This is false. And I think that's why it's in the joke, cartoon of this, why it's funny, because the underlying premise, the unstated implicit premise is assumed to be, is that this is bad when really most people think just generally being a nice person is good. there's a reason this question is on the practice quiz and not the actual quiz. So hopefully it was interesting to reconstruct. Let's do the final one. The cat is responsible for the disappearing pens. Every time the cat gets in my office, my pens disappear. Coincidence? I don't think so. So is it an argument? If so, what is the conclusion? There is no conclusion or reason indicator word. So it's up to us to figure out what is being claimed and what supports what, what's the so what. So let's just start by getting down statements. The cat is responsible for the disappearing pens. Every time the cat gets in the office, pens disappear. Coincidence? Rhetorical question. I don't think so. So let's just combine that. It's not a coincidence. Now you might have been tempted to translate this as I think it's not a coincidence, but I think is like unnecessary guarding language. It's not really a claim about what we think, and we don't need to guard it so much. Instead, we can just say it's not a coincidence. That's what's being claimed. Okay, do any of these statements support the others? Are any of these the conclusion? Yes, the conclusion is the cat is responsible for the disappearing pens. Reasons. Well, every time it gets in my office, pens disappear. It's not a coincidence. Therefore, the cat is responsible for the disappearing pens. So we've got this. So if we were answering part A, we would say, yes, this is an argument. The conclusion is the cat is responsible for the disappearing pens. It is explicitly stated. End of answer. Now put it in standard form. We've already done that. Importantly, this captures this, what we were actually given. We've made a few changes to help to clarify the argument. However, this is still ultimately going to be a fairly superficial reconstruction of this argument. We can do better, but maybe we don't see it yet. So let's go on to part C. We can always come back and fix up our reconstruction as we think about it more deeply. So let's ask ourselves, does this argument, as we've reconstructed it, have any of the characteristic features or patterns of an informal fallacy? Now, the claim about coincidence and every time A happens, B happens, hopefully this is flagging, looks like maybe a claim about correlation, causation kind of thing going on. If so, if you're thinking like maybe this is starting to look like a false cause fallacy, you should give the definite, like in part C, you should give the definition of what exactly the fallacy is so that you can say, and this has some kind of resemblance to that definition. So if this is a false cause fallacy, it should have a correlation, and it should be drawing a conclusion about causation. And one of the things we learn in the module about causation is that we don't often use these words explicitly. So it helps to clarify the reasoning if you fill them in. So instead of every time the cat gets in my office, my pens disappear, you might rephrase this. The cat getting in my office is correlated with my pens disappearing, or you might put in parentheses or brackets, something like this is a correlation claim. It's not a coincidence. This is we're ruling out one explanation for the correlation. One explanation is it's just a coincidence, and we're saying that's not the best explanation. And the conclusion should be about causation. Is it? The cat is responsible equals the cause of the disappearing pens. Okay, so now we've gone a little bit further than just what we were given. We've got correlation, not coincidence, therefore causation. And that is why it looks like a false cause fallacy. We are drawing conclusions about causation on the basis of correlation. So, final question, is this actually a fallacy? When is it a fallacy to draw a conclusion about causation on the basis of correlation? Importantly, correlation is a crucial piece of evidence for causation. It's not on its own sufficient. What we need to do is consider the possible explanations for correlation and ask, have we failed to rule out any plausible alternative explanations? Well, we know that there are always going to be four. One is A causes B causes A, C causes B and A, common cause, or coincidence. Now, the argument rules out coincidence, and we aren't given much information. Like, why isn't it coincidence? Well, let's assume for the sake of argument that there's good reason to think it's not a coincidence. Maybe it happens all the time. Like, maybe the correlation is so strong it couldn't be explained by coincidence. We'd have to do deeper statistical sort of work in order to deeply talk about coincidence, but if it's a fairly strong correlation, then that might be some reason to rule out coincidence. So there are these other options. So let's let A, every time the cat gets in my office, pens disappear, therefore the cat is the cause, A is the cat, and B is the disappearing pens. A causes B. That's one explanation. Why are these things correlated? Because the cat is stealing the pens. What are the other? The pens disappearing causes the cat to get in the office. This doesn't even make sense. That's not plausible enough to even be something we have to consider. Is there a common cause? Some other thing C that is responsible for the cat getting in the office and the pens disappearing. What could that be? If there is any plausible this that hasn't been ruled out, then we can't conclude this. And if not, then we can conclude this. The correct answer will depend on you making your case here. So I could imagine you saying, like, I'm imagining two people who live alone, and also I know my background information includes, I know cats take pens and then they lose them. They put them under the refrigerator and under the couch. Like, this is a thing that cats do. So in addition to, like, I have a causal, like this is a thing I know about cats that is consistent with this being a good explanation for my correlation. So this is looking like a reasonable thing to conclude. And it's very difficult to imagine what kind of common cause could do this, especially if you're imagining two adults living alone with a cat or something like that. In which case, the argument looks good. It's not obviously a fallacy. However, there is a potential common cause that works here, and let's see B. Kids also come into your office and take your stuff, like to do art projects and things, I guess. So kid comes in office, leaves the door open because they never close the door after. That seems like a thing a parent might harp on a kid for. Kid never closes the door to the office, takes the pens for like art, and lets the cat into the office because they forgot to close the door. So the kid causes both A and B, and that would explain the correlation, even though the conclusion isn't the right one. And so if you come up with this as like, that's actually a plausible explanation and we haven't ruled it out, so this is a false cause fallacy. And if you think that, no, I'm imagining people without kids or something like that, like, our background knowledge matters. That's why informal fallacies, reasoning through, non-deductive arguments, is difficult. We have to think about our background knowledge. It enters into our assessments. So this one could go either way. And a good answer is one that talks about explaining the correlation. Okay, that concludes our taking the informal fallacies quiz together. So let's submit it and see how we did on at least the auto-graded ones. It's only 2 that are not auto-graded. Good, we got all the multiple choice correct so far. Fill in the blanks look good. And there are explanations for all the fill in the blanks that you can go read as well. And the 2 passage analyses that we didn't do, there's sample answers that would actually be the kinds of things you might write, not just like overblown explanations for that. Okie doke. Hopefully this was helpful. Good luck on the quiz.